first learned about the existence of Columbine through John Denver's Mountain Song, with its line, "I've seen the quiet splendor of a field of Columbine." Anybody else know that tune? But I had no idea what a Columbine actually looked like until the late 1980s, when, while on a cross-country trip, I stopped in Steamboat Springs and came across a packet postcard of Columbine seeds. On the front was the picture of your state flower. On the back was an explanation of how this delicate wildflower got its name. Columba is Latin for dove, and the long spurs of the inner petals resemble the tail feathers of the bird of peace. You can see them on your, see that? Well, at that time I had a degree in peace studies, and I had just been part of a grassroots campaign to establish the U.S. Institute of Peace, so naturally I was utterly intrigued. I fell in love with that image, and meanwhile I had earned an MFA in creative writing, and I had learned how to take an image from nature and move it into symbol, and then extend it into its metaphoric meaning and beyond. Thus, when I received a Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation grant to publish the material I had developed during my MFA internship, I decided to put a Columbine on the cover of my book, Writing Recreatively, A Spiritual Quest for Women, a series of exercises I had created for the women in my home congregation in Virginia. Problem was, I'd still never actually seen a Columbine at that point. So I bought 2 pots from the local nursery, and I studied them for signs of that dove coming out of the flower, because I wanted to draw a flower for that cover. Here is that first edition of the book. Okay, it's crude, but it's the best I could do. And here is the first opening exercise from that book. Explore an image from nature, animal, vegetable, or mineral that best describes who you are at this point in your life. Here, as for that book, when Skinner House Books reissued its 3rd edition of that book, they changed the cover, which is why the copy of the book I donated to your book group in 2011 doesn't have a Columbine. Oh well. But even though the Columbine had vanished from the cover, it had dropped down deep into my psyche and was already affecting my personal life. That book propelled me into seminary, that place for training ministers, rabbis, and priests, but whose root word, seminarium, means seed plot, garden, nursery. Can you sense the difference between those 2 meanings? The first is instruction from top down, from some outer authority. The second is from inside out, self-authorizing. At Star King School for the Ministry, where both your Julia and I studied 10 years apart, offered an organic approach to preparation by nurturing one's specific gifts and dealing with one's inner demons so they don't get dumped out to future congregations. Make no mistake, giving yourself over to the call of ministry unleashes shadow parts of your personality, more than you ever even knew you had, let alone ever wanted to deal with. And as my first seminary year progressed, I began to realize I was going to have to give up everything in my previous life in order to move into the next one. And I knew that I was going to need some concrete symbol to carry me through that transformative process, and for grounding, and for guidance. And I knew it would have to be something from the natural world, because nature has always informed my spirit and inspired me. Plus, I was rediscovering Emerson in Starr King and a Starr King course on our Transcendentalist heritage. Did you know that Emerson and most of the other male members of the Transcendentalist group were Unitarian ministers? Reading and rereading his essay on nature affirmed that I could trust the natural world to reflect my inner truth. And so it came to pass that on an Easter Sunday morning, instead of heading for church, a classmate and I drove to the beach. And on the way, we made a quick stop at a nursery that we found open. Walking inside, I had no idea what I was looking for until I found it. A pot of Columbine with pale pink blossoms flying high on a singular stem. I was delighted. I brought it back to my dorm room, placed it on the windowsill, and let it teach me what I needed to know, which was this. In ancient times, the image of the dove being born from the mouth of the dolphin, and dolphin is the root of that is Delphos, and that means womb, symbolized women's rebirth journey. For a woman's spiritual task is to give birth to her whole self out of her ego self, and that's absolutely the opposite and totally different from the man's journey. That lovely pink Columbine kept me faithful to the hard work of saying yes to ministry that whole spring. And then, as I prepared to go home that summer to close out my old life, I took the pot of Columbine to the gardener at Starr King School and asked her to plant it somewhere. She did, right beneath an enormous tree in front of the school. All that second year, as I struggled to survive, living in that liminal space, you know, the one between that old, familiar, secure life and that new life that was so indistinguishable and uncertain, and I wasn't sure what I wanted and what was ever going to happen, that space in between that, I waited for that Columbine to bloom again. When it finally bloomed, it was small, close to the ground, red with a yellow center. Stunned, I sought out the gardener. What happened to my precious pink Columbine? She looked at it and declared, it reverted to its original self. All nursery-grown Columbine are hybrids. They are cultivated to be large and showy. This one simply became its authentic self again. Now, wasn't that perfect metaphor for becoming a minister and beginning a new life for my authentic self? And thus, when I was ordained, I wore a Columbine stole, this one, and I had bouquets of Columbine in the church and at the reception. It is still a very powerful image, symbol, metaphor for me. And this one that keeps me faithful to my inner and outer work. And here's where it is in my life today. Since I retired from ministry 5 years ago, I have found a new life with a partner whose home is here in Colorado. We spend our winters in my home in Las Vegas, summers here in Denver. And we love to hike a favorite trail up near Grinnell Pass, where we annually visit our favorite field of Columbine. But over the past few years, we have noticed that they are thinning and fading, exactly as modeled by a researcher studying the effects of climate change on all pine landscapes. Your state flower is being replaced by sage. Now, as a Unitarian Universalist whose role models are the Transcendentalists, I am not about to let that happen without putting up a fight. For as you may know, nearly all of Emerson's Transcendentalist cohorts were engaged in social activism, from Margaret Fuller's feminism to Elizabeth Peabody and Bronson Alcott's education reform, from Theodore Parker's focus on abolition to slavery, to Henry David Thoreau's act of civil disobedience to protest the Mexican-American War that annexed the whole of the Southwest. So what am I doing to curb and mitigate human-caused climate change that is threatening the Columbine? Well, that's why I'm here with you this morning, to talk about the climate challenge and to make a public commitment on behalf of the Columbine here at Columbine. I want you to consider the word ecos. It is Greek for home. Our English words ecology and economy both come from that singular root. And I submit unto you that any economic activity that threatens the ecosystems on our home planet is insane, immoral, and ought to be deemed illegal. For just as the cotton-based economy of the pre-Civil War era did not justify slavery, the fossil fuel-based economy of today does not justify enslaving the living earth. Yet the fossil fuel industry is determined to dig in, frack for, drill down to, and burn every last ounce of CO2 releasing coal, oil, natural gas for its bottom line of profit. But the real bottom line is this: we need to leave the rest of the reserves in the ground. We can't burn any more gas, oil, or coal and still have any hope of having a viable planet. Science is very clear on this. 350 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere is our upper limit if we have any hope of having a viable planet. We passed 400 parts per million last summer. We know this inconvenient truth, yet we seem to be stymied in our response to it. Why is that? Or as Neil deGrasse Tyson put it recently during his new version of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, has everybody been watching that? We are dumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere at a rate the Earth has not seen since the great climate catastrophes of the past, the ones that led to mass extinctions. We can't seem to break our addiction to burning fossil fuels and bring back the climate last seen by the dinosaurs, a climate that will drown our coastal cities, wreak havoc on our environment and our ability to feed ourselves. The dinosaurs never saw that asteroid coming. What's our excuse? To get my head around that, I have begun to picture our addiction to fossil fuels as an amorphous beast, that proverbial elephant in the middle of the living room that is destroying everything in sight, while we cling cringing to the fringes of the homeroom, trying to please and appease it, so as not to provoke it into a rage that will set off a rampage of wildfires, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods. And so we wittingly or unwittingly are complicit in sabotaging anything that will antagonize this shape-shifting monster as it devours our common resources and piles up waste products and pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in the name of progress. This, to me, feels a lot like a dysfunctional family of an alcoholic whose addiction is the glue that keeps the whole system going. Yet, like a concerned family that tries to control the addictive behavior before it gets out of hand and becomes ugly, by insisting that the addict has only one drink or drug, to fend off the withdrawal symptoms and maintain the status quo, we attempt to transition to a greener economy by using natural gas as a bridge fuel, which in reality, its methane is even more potent greenhouse gas and potentially far more dangerous and destructive. We need to leave it in the ground. We need to stop feeling this beastly addiction altogether. The ultimate reality is this: regulations to make hydraulic fracturing, coal mining, and burning, tar sands extraction, transportation, and refining safer are all completely beside the point. We need to leave it all in the ground and switch to renewable energy now. And so I applaud that our UUA has just voted to divest its endowment portfolio from fossil fuel investments, That includes my pension. My personal investment portfolio from my previous life has been green for a long time now. This is not only a moral imperative, it's a good financial decision. For the fossil fuel industry is in decline, and Wall Street knows it. Dealing with this new reality indeed requires a radical religious response and must become a matter of conscience. And an emergent consciousness of the problem is beginning to morph into political conscientiousness about our own personal carbon footprints, and there it is becoming a collective conscience that is mobilizing people across the continent and the planet. Point of fact, there already are multiple efforts being made to stop that beast in its tracks and to mitigate the planetary destruction already in process. I'm going to name just a few of them. You can go to their websites, follow them on Facebook, find your place, comfort place for action. The People's Climate March, you heard about that? That's converging on New York City on September 21st, time for the UN Summit on the climate crisis. This march is projected to be the largest public response to climate to date, and there will be local events scheduled as well. You can go to their website. There have been marches and protests and demonstrations going on across the country for a long time. In fact, 2 Februaries ago, 350.org, the Sierra Club, Idle No More, staged a massive rally in D.C. where hundreds of people got arrested, including NASA's James Hansen, for chaining themselves to the White House fence. And last March, 40-plus people left Los Angeles and began a great climate march across the United States. They expect to reach D.C. by November. They came through Denver at the beginning of the summer. Maybe you joined them. Maybe you read about them in the Post. There are children's crusades going on as well. Here in Colorado, a 13-year-old up in Boulder has organized his peers into Earth Guardians. They have a lovely website and Facebook page. It's an organization of dedicated youth from around the world committed to standing up and protecting the earth, water, air, and atmosphere. This amazing young man has confronted his city council about its responsibility, or rather its lack of response, to the future of the children. You know, those who can't yet vote and so don't count. You can watch that on YouTube if you dare. It is not pretty. If such dramatic actions and traumatic activism isn't right for you, if you don't want to risk having an arrest record, being labeled an eco-terrorist, or vilified as a watermelon, green on the outside, red on the inside, for trying to preserve the planet, you might want to check out something gentle, like the Citizens Climate Lobby that's trying to create political will for a livable Earth through promoting a revenue-neutral carbon tax. You can find more information about that. You can speak to my partner at the end of the service, and Kathleen is here as well. And while you're at it, you may also want to talk to my partner back there about his new book, Living Without Fire. It describes how we have converted a 40-year-old home to be fossil-free, so that now we power all our energy needs through rooftop solar, geothermal, and that includes that electric car that's out in your parking lot this morning. For the political and the personal are truly conjoined. The private and the public are interconnected, and what is at stake here is nothing less than the fate of the earth and all its inhabitants, not just the Columbine. This is the greatest challenge our species has ever faced, and if we continue this suicidal, homicidal, ecocidal behavior, the earth will surely shut us off as a failed evolutionary experiment. And all that will remain is our fossilized bones, just a little layer higher than the dinosaurs. Before that happens, I invite you to return to your image from the natural world that maybe you chose at the beginning and ask 2 questions. How is it being affected by the changing climate? And what are you willing to do about it? Let us pause for a moment for silent reflection.